Are you a sexy, indulgent musician suffering from consistent long hours, crippling self-doubt, and constant disappointment? Well, do we have a show for you?
Sex, drugs, and disappointment. Sex, drugs, and disappointment. Sex, drugs, and disappointment.
Welcome to Sex, Drugs, and Disappointment, a bi-weekly deep dive into what it takes to be a healthy and successful musician in the modern industry. My name is Melody Kaiser.
And I'm Dustin Williams.
And we are both full-time musicians and creative entrepreneurs. And today we are sharing our advice on buying your first guitar or bass and how to get started on your new musical journey.
Yeah, getting your first instrument is extremely overwhelming sometimes. And from determining like which brand to understanding like how to get started with playing, it can just be a lot for first-time musicians. And even if you've played before and you haven't done it in a while, and maybe you used to have a guitar when you were a kid and you sold it, kind of getting back into it is truly it's like relearning. It's going through the experience again, So
For sure.
So we just thought we would kind of give our opinions on some of the brands that we feel are good for beginners, and also some tips you can use to practice and improve as an instrumentalist, as a musician in general.
Yeah, and obviously this really, as far as the brands and stuff, this really depends on your budget. And so I say we just dive in.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're just getting your first instrument ever and you don't even know if you're going to like it, you're probably not going to spend a lot of money on the instrument.
You shouldn't.
Yeah. And so also we're specifically talking about like electric, acoustic guitar and bass in this video, because that's kind of what we specialize in. So say that your budget in guitar is like under $250. There are some brands that we recommend. And so I guess first, what are your opinions, Dustin, on first-time musician acoustic versus electric?
As far as brands go?
Just even like they don't know what they want yet, which is better for the beginner?
Good question.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I've always kind of been of the mind that you should pick the instrument that is going to suit the type of music you want to play. So if you want to play, folk and singer-songwriter and bluegrass or something like that, I mean, maybe acoustic's the better option for you. If you want to play rock and roll, like obviously, the electric is probably the better choice. That said, like I've definitely heard a lot of people say, start on acoustic because it's a little bit harder. And, if you can master that, you can master the electric. And to some degree, I see where people are coming from, because it is harder to often to press down the strings or to bend strings on an acoustic guitar. So if you can get good at that, transferring to an electric does make it easier. But at the same time, I just feel like they are quite different,
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, it's definitely going to be whatever kind of music you're wanting to play. Like, if you like rock music and you want to be able to do guitar solos, and if you just generally like electric guitar music better, of course you're going to want to go with that.
Right,
what I mean? But if you want to just kind of sing songs and sing with your friends and do the campfire thing, or you really like John Denver or something like that, like obviously the acoustic's going to be the way to go.
Yeah.
But there's no hard set rule on it. Like, I started on electric guitar. Oh, did you? Which a lot of people don't.
Yeah, I started on acoustic when I picked up guitar.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's also too, you have to think about with an electric guitar, you are going to have to budget for like an amp, right, and cables and all that kind of stuff. So think about that too. Like, you can get just a straight up acoustic guitar for cheaper than you could get an electric with an amp. So you have to kind of think about that too. One thing, and this is just getting right into the brands, Squier makes a really good beginner guitar pack. Squier is actually made by Fender, which is a company I think most people have at least seen in their lives. They're good at everything. So they make like a Squier beginner pack, and it's basically a Stratocaster. It comes with a little amp, Like I think cables, books, tuner, it's kind of everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not super affordable. I think it's still like $300 or $400.
It's about $3. Yeah, it's about $3,
when you
$350.
think about though having to buy a guitar and then an amp separately, you are going to save money with that option.
Yeah.
The amp is not, it's not great. And you really, as far as I know, they still only have, they're just clean amps. Like it's not going to give you like distortion or anything like that in those pack amps. So just think about that too. Like if you want to play Master of Puppets and have it sound like Master of Puppets, that amp will not do that for you on its own. So
right, yeah.
just so you know, I mean, so definitely weigh that option. But I think in general, Squier Stratocasters for a first time electric guitar buyer, I mean, they're great guitars.
Yeah.
You know, they're sturdy. They're really hard to break if you're buying it for a kid.
And if they do break, the parts are easy to replace
right.
as well.
Yeah. And then, so I guess the two big like heavy players that everybody is gonna know, I think, in electric guitar world is Gibson and Fender, and that's really because they're just classic American brands. And I mean, unless you're listening to this podcast elsewhere, but even then, I think worldwide they're still like two of the biggest names in guitar for
Definitely,
sure.
Yeah.
And Gibson makes an affordable guitar brand. It wasn't always owned by Gibson, but they bought this company called Epiphone. And Epiphone is kind of like the affordable line for Gibson guitars. They're pretty evenly priced with Squier.
Yeah, I would say so.
Because Squier has some like little bit higher middle tier, like classic vibe.
Yeah.
Is a
Series.
series model of Squier guitars that are a little bit more expensive, but they are a lot better, I will say.
Definitely.
Like,
the classic vibe basses that I've played were very impressive.
they're very good. Yeah. It's like as close as you can get to a Fender guitar without a Fender price tag. And it kind of is the same for Epiphone. Like they probably get up, I would say like $800 is like the most expensive Epiphone, which seems like a lot to a lot of people. But guitars are pricey investments for sure.
Yeah.
Basses are too, but I'm just kind of speaking strictly on guitar for a minute. And they're going to have differences between like a Fender Stratocaster and a Gibson Les Paul.
Definitely.
Huge
difference.
Yeah, they're very different guitars, even though they're both electric guitars. Where you've probably heard the sound, they can be used for anything. They're both solid electric guitars, but just kind of in general, Gibson guitars like the Les Paul come with these pickups called humbuckers, right? And they're generally like a good bit warmer and thicker sounding. Whereas a Fender Stratocaster has single coil pickups and they're a lot thinner and kind of a bluesy sound. So if you like John Mayer, that's a great example of like a Fender Strat sound. John Mayer, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, that kind of bluesy stratty sound. Whereas Gibson Les Paul is a lot more of like a rock guitar typically. You know what I mean? It's like
Led Zeppelin.
Yeah,
Jimmy
Led
Page,
Zeppelin, Ace Frehley, like it's the rock guitar. So kind of I would do some searching on YouTube too and listen to different examples before you decide on what kind of electric guitar you want to get, because they are pretty different. And the necks can be really different too. So I always recommend, if this is your first guitar that you're buying, like you can get it on Amazon and that would be fine, but it does kind of matter how it feels in your hands.
Yeah.
So if you can get to a music store and actually play a guitar before you buy it, I think you'll find that you're going to be a lot happier.
Definitely.
With your purchase. But in bass world, not so much Gibson, like they do make basses, but
of course, yeah.
What do you think for like basses as far as like Fender versus?
You mean it's like as far as beginner, like when you like or just like for your first guitar, or you mean those particular two brands, or?
I mean, we can get into both. I mean, your first guitar, or you know, you're a returning guitar player and you just want to know what to look for in a guitar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So I love both. I actually don't own any Gibson basses. I'd like to have one, but kind of like what you were saying, they're a little bit like on the darker side, like the tonally. Their necks are chunkier. To me, they always seem heavier, but that could just be my interpretation, because I think a lot of people say that they feel like Gibson basses are lighter than Fenders. I don't know. I couldn't say.
I mean,
sure.
if it's anything like a Les Pauls are usually pretty heavy. If they're
yeah.
solid, some of the really expensive Les Pauls, like a Gibson line of Les Paul, they started hollowing them out a little bit so that they weren't so heavy anymore.
Okay.
But like a real original kind of style Gibson Les Paul is pretty heavy. It's solid mahogany and it's pretty thick. So, you know, kind of put that in too. Like in general, a Les Paul is going to be way heavier than a Strat.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, if maybe you're getting into guitar and you know that you plan on performing and maybe you have like a bad shoulder or a bad back, like maybe maybe the Les Paul isn't the way to go. But yeah, I mean, as far as the basses in general, I mean, I'll talk starter stuff first. Like, actually, my first bass was a part of a starter pack, like you were talking about, but it was actually Ibanez. And I really liked that. And honestly, I think I would probably push for that rather than starting with like a Squier starter pack for bass. And the only reason I say that is because I feel like usually the Ibanez bass starter packs have the exact same pickup arrangement as like a P bass or like a PJ situation. Which for those of you listening, if you don't know what that means, a P bass is short for precision bass. There's a whole history behind the name there we'll go into later. And then J bass is, you know, jazz bass. And they're basically, the jazz bass pickup is like kind of a longer, like thinner, kind of almost like finger length or a little longer pickup, whereas the precision pickups are kind of like two smaller ones stacked, kind of next to each other. So anyway, my starter bass was a PJ style, so I had a lot of tonal versatility. The stuff it came with, you know, was pretty standard: the amp, the cable, the headphones, all that stuff. But I think the problem I've noticed is that with like the Squier starter basses, like the Affinity series, usually, if you're gonna get a beginner guitar, like I would avoid Affinity series Squiers. They're just about as cheap as you can get. And
is the Affinity cheaper than the Bullet?
I don't know. I don't think so.
You'll be able to tell, honestly, even if you've never picked up a guitar, when you pick up the really cheap Squier versus like whatever the next step up is. You'll be able to do that at the guitar store. But I think even in somebody's hands, a good way to tell is on the really cheap Squiers. Not always are the fret ends kind of sticking out. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But the neck is very baseball bat feeling. And I don't mean in size. I mean it's unfinished and it's very raw feeling. There's literally no finish on it at all.
Yeah, it feels like you're rubbing like a stick that you've whittled or something. It's kind of weird.
There's literally no finish on it at all. Like it's not even like an oil gun. What do they call that? Is it gun oil?
I don't know.
Okay, yeah. Well, sometimes you can unfinish a neck, but it's still like finished in this oil so that the wood doesn't like
dry out.
Yeah, this they didn't care. Like the wood is just like literally unfinished. Like it came off a planer and they stuck it on the guitar. Okay. So if you kind of feel that, like that's
not a good sign.
I mean, I would avoid it because like, you know, there's literally nothing on it to protect it from anything.
Right.
But if that's the only thing in your budget, those are still great guitars.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like compared to a lot of other guitars, they're solid. Like you're not going to go wrong getting that. And I'm sure it's the same for the bass.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing I would say with bass, like when we were talking about the Gibson and Fender thing, if you are going to spend a little bit more money and get a nicer instrument, then personally, I've always preferred Fenders more. I love the way they feel. I love the way they sound. If you have a goal of getting into this professionally, if you want to do, you know, freelance work, if you want to play cover gigs or original music, whatever, the kind of the golden standard of bass guitar was the P bass and still is to this day, the precision bass, which is like the first mass produced bass guitar ever. It was like the 51 precision bass. And the reason is it just sits really well in a mix. There's something about the way, you know, the pickups are configured, I guess, and the way they're, you know, kind of the EQ comes out. I don't know. I mean, you have better probably words for this than I do, Mel, because you were luthier. So like, I'm just going off of like experience and from, you know, what I've heard and noticed. But if you look at, you know, records from the past and like most of your favorite records, they were probably, the bass lines were probably played on a precision bass or a jazz bass. Not to mention that, especially this is maybe a good thing for those of you considering buying an instrument for a kid. Squiers and Fenders, like, I mean, it's not like they're unbreakable because they can definitely break, but they're really not.
Takes a lot.
It takes a lot, and they're really not hard to either repair or to replace parts on. They were kind of designed that way. Like Leo Fender, from what I've heard, what I've read, you know, he was very much like a logical, pragmatic kind of designer. Whereas Gibson was a little bit more about the visual flair and kind of, you know, making it a little fancier. But, and many of you listening probably know this, they're also known for snapping at the headstock a lot. So if you
Gibsons are, by the way.
Yeah, Gibsons,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Yeah. Or Epiphone, because that has happened to my Epiphone guitar. The headstock snapped off, got it fixed. It looks amazing. You could never tell, but shout out to Southeastern Guitar Repair in Buford, Georgia for fixing that for me.
But honestly, Gibson they can help the problem, but the thing with Gibsons is they're kind of in that, I think classic car people will really understand this analogy. It's kind of in that realm of like, people know it's a flaw, like they know it's a design flaw, but like they don't want it any other way because this is how it's always been done. And it's like a very traditional guitar company.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Definitely.
And Fender is kind of the same way. Like you were right. They're kind of like I guess you could say like the Ford Motor Company of guitar companies.
That's
like,
a great way to put it.
They literally Fender finishes are car paint originally. That's literally what they were.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you can tell when you look at them, it looks like 50s and 60s car colors.
Totally.
Whereas Gibson was like the natural finish. They would just kind of
Stain.
stain the wood. So you can actually see the wood a lot more on Gibsons traditionally. They painted stuff later. But so just keep that in mind too. And I will say, in general, Fender does have more options of, say this isn't like your very first guitar and you actually want like a Fender. For guitar and basses, they have a Mexican series that's basically made in Corona, California is I don't know where the Mexican ones are made, but they're basically the same thing as the American basses and guitars. I mean, really and truly, they are.
All three Fenders that I own are made in Mexico.
Yeah.
They're not American.
And they're so much more affordable. So like if you want to do like a mid-tier Fender Strat that's actually a really good guitar, but it's not going to break the bank, look at the Mexican series.
Yeah.
Gibson doesn't really have a cheap series. If it says Gibson on it, that comes with a price tag kind of automatically. I mean, they have cheaper models of guitars, but nothing is really going to be cheap with Gibson.
There's like nothing under like 800 these days. It seems like brand new, you know, and that's like low bar, like, you know, they clearly didn't care all that much about the guitar as, you know, they were putting it out kind of thing.
I mean, just me personally, this is going to be a hot take. I wouldn't get a cheap Gibson.
Yeah. No, I agree. If you're going to get a Gibson, like you might as well spend the money.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So like a Les Paul standard, I don't even know now. Is it like 25, 3,000?
Probably.
Something
Maybe,
like that?
I don't know.
Yeah. That's the budget I would spend if you're going to get a Gibson. And that's not to say you can't find one used. Used is always great with stuff like that. But with Gibsons, like we were saying, if you buy it used, really make sure that you know if the headstock's been broken.
Yeah.
Because that is you can get it a lot cheaper if it has been.
And other stuff to look for too, just in general when buying a guitar, whether it's Gibson or another, like one of the first things you should do, of course, like when you plug it in. And by the way, if you are a returning buyer, I suggest plugging the guitar into an amp that's going to be as close to yours as possible, because you really want to make sure you're getting kind of a more even tone. And honestly, the truth is, I think like a lot of places, like if you're serious about buying a guitar, a lot of places will probably let you bring your amp in and let you try it through your rig.
I don't think anybody would really care.
Unless it's like a fucking 200-watt half stack, but
I have to play it like I do at my shows. I have to turn it to 10, you guys. Yeah, don't do that. But
yeah, don't do that. So things like, checking for, this is smaller stuff, checking for cracks in the finish, which is going to be more likely with a used guitar or a vintage guitar. If it's new and it has a crack, like they
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen
Really?
Fender Strats out of the box that I think it was more the Squier ones, but where they would screw the pick guard down too tight and it would just crack the paint.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Fender paint is Fender is polyurethane finish.
Mm-hmm.
So when it cracks in chips. So keep that in mind. It does not dent very well. It chips extremely well.
Yeah.
That whole chunk will come off.
My P-bass right over there has chunks taken out of it. Yeah.
So just keep that in mind too. That's a thing. So if you see the chips and you don't like them, I mean, it's kind of part of the Fender thing, but just be aware. And if it is cracked, it will chip eventually. So don't buy it if you don't want chips out of your guitar.
Right.
At some point.
But I mean, that's an easy one, right? I think most people, if you're going to buy a guitar, if you see a crack in it, you're probably gonna be like, I'm good. But some other things like electronics, and specifically, whether it's an active or passive bass or, guitar, when you're checking the electronics, you want to have it plugged in, you want to twist the knobs, but you also should play something and let it ring out and twist it, because I have noticed that sometimes it's not crackling if you're just holding the guitar and not playing anything. But if you do hit a note and then start to turn the knob, it'll crackle. And I don't know why, but
it's just dirty.
I mean, I know why it's crackling. Yeah. I guess I just don't know why it won't do it when you're not playing. I don't know. But point is, there's dirt and stuff probably in there, which is an easy fix, but it's still something you want to look for, because you don't want to take home a brand new guitar and then deal with that.
Yeah.
And most of that stuff electronically is pretty easy to fix. A little contact cleaner, which is available at Home Depot. You just spray it on there and twist it around a whole bunch, twist the knob around, and usually that'll take care of it. But if you are looking at an active bass, a lot of active basses, they have basically they have a preamp that is powered by a 9-volt battery, usually one, sometimes two. What you want to do is check each of those EQ knobs, obviously for crackles, but also to make sure they're actually doing something, because your bass EQ knob on a active bass may not be working, and so obviously that's an issue, and you want to make sure that if you're going to spend the money, that all of the electronics work properly, which means that if you aren't sure what they're supposed to do, before you buy it, talk to somebody there, because I can't tell you how many students I've had that come in with a new active bass, and they're they completely unaware of what any of the controls do, and so that that's part of the lesson, and that's fine. I'm happy to explain it because I love bass, and I love teaching, but you should be familiar with your equipment, especially if you're a returning buyer. Make sure you know what each of those things does, because you may realize oh, this is more than I need. And then you don't need to spend the money on an active bass just because Marcus Miller uses one,
Right.
Anyway.
No, that's true. And there are active guitars as well, it's usually more in the metal world. The guitars take batteries, but it basically, if you don't want to change the battery in your guitar, don't get an active bass or guitar. So, because it is kind of a pain. And I will say too, if you plan on playing out, or if you don't plan on changing the battery a lot, especially with the basses, when that battery starts to go bad, some crazy alien noises start coming out of the bass.
Yes, it
do. Sounds nuts. It's it's really weird.
It is really weird.
The guitar, it just kind of starts to sound like crap. But it doesn't do, maybe some guitars, but it was always the basses. And I think that's more of the preamp circuitry is what I mean? It's dying. Mm-hmm. But metal, if you're really into the metal world, probably the biggest heavy hitter in that brand wise is probably Ibanez. which they're made in Japan originally. But they have all kinds of models too. So they have beginner models, and they obviously have models that are thousands and thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and in the metal world now, you guys have probably seen, if you're into like metal music, like Polyphia and all that kind of stuff, the guitars with no headstocks are a really big thing right now with the fan frets.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if you don't know what that is, it's kind of like, so guitar frets are usually like horizontal on the neck, and they're straight. They're all straight. They're parallel all the way down. Fan frets, it's like they're organized in a way that's supposed to be like really ergonomic, and you can play super fast. But I mean, honestly, I think they do have models that are cheaper now. But
Ibanez makes some too.
Strandberg is the big like headless brand right now. But those are pretty expensive. So unless I wouldn't recommend that to somebody if this is your first guitar.
Definitely. But
if you want to experiment with something like that, check out that brand, because they're kind of a big deal right now. For sure. And basically too, this is kind of acoustic or electric, and I want to get into acoustic in just a minute, but making sure too, like, that you check every fret on the guitar or bass before you buy it.
Definitely.
Because sometimes the fret may kind of be out of its slot a little bit, or the neck may be kind of messed up a little bit. And basically it's called fretting out, but it doesn't make a note, basically, or it's the same note as the next fret above it. You really want to avoid that, because that's like a major issue. If it's just the fret needs to be hammered back in the slot, it's not a big deal. Like, all of these things can be fixed, but it's a lot of extra money that you're going to have to put into it. So, like, you know, pick your battle.
Yeah, pick your battle. Yeah, for
like,
sure. Yeah.
Do you want to deal with that? And if not, don't get that. And so, and for acoustic guitars, right? Let's kind of dive into that a little bit, because this is a little bit of a different world, to be honest. So the big heavy players, like the Gibson and Fender, quote unquote, of acoustic guitars is Taylor and Martin. They're both American brands. Martin is been the guitar forever, like the acoustic guitar. It was like the original dreadnought kind of look. They've
like
been around
1800s, right?
Yeah. They were like the Civil War guitar. I think it was before that. I think it was like 1839. Don't quote me on that, but something like that.
Yeah.
It says it on all of them, I think. So, you know, it's been around forever, but that comes with, both of those guitar brands are generally pretty expensive. They're very nice guitars. Again, they have like some cheaper models. And I will say, if you are set on like Martin versus Taylor, like, these are great guitar brands. If you're wanting to spend less than $1,000, do a Taylor, because they're
really?
real wood. So the Martin, cheap Martins are like the composite back and side. So they're basically like plasticky. So in my opinion, you should get a guitar that's solid wood. And so like the GS Mini by Taylor, those are solid and they're small. Yeah, the little Martins are just not really my cup of tea. But, you know, if you want a Martin and you want the small Martin, kind of like the Ed Sheeran thing, although some of them may be solid back and sides, but not the ones I'm thinking of, like the really cheaper ones, like the affordable ones, basically, for most people are not so great. So kind of keep that in mind. And realistically, if you don't even have like $700 or so to spend, and this is kind of your first guitar, like if you say your budget's like $250-ish, which is the cheapest that I would go, honestly.
Any cheaper than that.
And I know that not everybody can do that, but if you can spend $250, that's like kind of like where they start to actually be like pretty okay guitars. I would do Yamaha. Okay. Yamaha also makes electric guitars and basses, but you don't see them that much. Yamaha acoustic guitars are definitely huge. if you go into like your local Guitar Center, it's half of the main room is Yamaha.
Oh, wow.
So
Is it really?
it's
I didn't
a
even
lot.
notice that. Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot. Or at least a huge chunk of the main room.
Yeah.
And Yamaha has some stuff that gets kind of expensive, like $700-800.
Oh yeah, and well, like I said, like they do drum sets, like their studio customs and stage custom drum sets are like highly sought after.
Right.
Some of their basses are actually really nice. So, but yeah, Yamaha. Another one actually, because my first acoustic guitar was an Alvarez.
Oh yeah.
And it was a decent guitar. It was like maybe a $300 guitar, and it lasted a really long time. The only reason I stopped using it is because I part of the front got like cracked a little bit. And then another one actually, the Epiphone Hummingbird I've heard is really good, and that's kind of, it's more than like a Yamaha, but less than like a Taylor or Martin. So if you can afford like a mid-level, like you could probably find a used Hummingbird for like $6, maybe
Probably.
$5 or $6,
Yeah.
especially like, you know, if somebody's trying to get rid of
And that
it.
is an Epiphone Hummingbird.
Yes, Epiphone Hummingbird.
So Gibson also makes acoustics, obviously, because Epiphone's owned by
the
Gibson.
J series,
but
right?
They have the J series, the Gibson Hummingbird. That's what I was saying. Like if you look it up on Reverb, it's not going to be $500 or $600 if it says Gibson. But
Yeah, make sure it's Epiphone. Yeah.
Gibson makes acoustic guitars, and they're actually really, really great. I mean, they're I would consider them like a platinum level acoustic. You don't see them as much though as Martin or Taylor, but they're solid guitars, but they're also very expensive. So kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, there's a lot of guitar brands out there that aren't bad. Breedlove is not a bad guitar brand.
Yeah. Ovation sucks.
Yeah, I don't really like Ovations. That's the kind
Another
that kind of
hot
have the round backs. Is it a hot take? I feel like most people.
I feel like most people I know hate them, but like there are some people that will die on that hill. And if you really love Ovations, I'm sorry. Like I don't mean to personally offend you, but I hate those guitars so much.
They're half plastic, so.
Right. And when you sit down and try to play them, like it rolls off your tummy. It's the worst.
Especially if you're a little chubby, like just it falls on the floor. So kind of keep that in mind. Takamine, however you say that, they're not bad. They originally were in big trouble, I think, in the 70s because they were accused and guilty of copying Martin, like hardcore.
Really?
I mean, like the design, the bracing was the same, and they were selling them for like $700, and so everybody wanted them, and they got in trouble because even like the headstock, I'll show you a picture later. It was like literally like
the exact same.
Martin copy.
Oh
Yeah. It just said Takamine. But anyway, those are decent. I mean, they have some models that are really, really good. That was my brother's first acoustic guitar. He got an acoustic before I did, but it was good. It was solid wood and stuff.
I think I've played one before. A Takamine, right? Yeah. I think I've played. Are they Japanese?
Probably. They sound Japanese.
The name does,
I don't know. So I would say yes, and then somebody's going to be like, "What is Korean?" But it sounds Japanese, I would assume. So there are tons of brands. Another kind of, I guess it's a hot take because somebody's going to be like, "What? That's what I have." Fender acoustics are not, for the most part, great.
Yeah, I have one, and I can tell you for sure they're not that great.
Yeah.
It gets the job done.
Yeah. I mean, they're workhorses, but they're not, I wouldn't buy one, basically.
Yeah.
In that range, I would do Yamaha or any of the other brands that we're saying pretty much over Fender.
Yeah.
Guild is making a comeback. Guild guitars.
Yeah.
They're starting to come back, and some of them are good. You know, honestly, the thing with acoustics, and this is going to be way more like heavily important for the acoustic guitar, is to play it before you leave. Because with an acoustic guitar, it literally is the instrument itself. Like there's no amp, unless it's an acoustic electric, but that's different. There's no amp to make it sound good. Like an acoustic is the instrument itself. So even in the same model, in the same brand, two guitars can sound pretty different.
Yeah.
So like I would not get an acoustic on the internet over going in person. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. But if you can go and play them, I think you'll be surprised too, going from brand to brand. Like, you would think, oh, Fender, that's a huge brand. You'll play a Fender acoustic and then pick up a Yamaha. you'll be like, oh, this is way cheaper and sounds way better.
Yeah.
So, just go and like experiment with it. I think that's really important for acoustic guitars.
Yeah.
And that was specifically like steel string acoustic guitars. You can also do nylon string acoustic guitars, which is more of like the classical way.
Mm-hmm.
And for affordable brands in that, I don't think you can really beat Cordoba right now. They're kind of like the mass-produced classical guitar right now, but they're actually they have some really good models. But I'm trying to remember more. Lucero is one. I think that they're fine. I'm not so much of a classical guitar person, so I may not be like the person to really recommend kind of stuff like that. But Cordoba seems really good for a cheap price. So if you don't want your fingers to hurt so much, classical's, but also keep in mind, I wouldn't recommend it for really little kids because the necks are a lot bigger, thicker, wider is the right word.
Yeah.
On classical guitars. And it's hard for me to do certain chords on classical guitars.
Yeah.
Probably because I'm not used to it, but also it is a significant difference in width.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impressive.
Yeah. So basically, the width of a classical guitar neck is like wider than like a standard 4-string bass guitar. So like it's pretty big.
If you have little hands, it's not for you.
Probably not.
Yeah. Probably not.
I that said, I've seen, little children playing full-sized classical guitars. So if you're determined, like, don't let us stop you. If you want to do it, like, but that said, I do agree. I think, for the most part, and just for like, the cost effectiveness and like durability, like if you're going to get a guitar for a little kid, like get a Squier Bullet or Squier Affinity. Like if you really want to go cheap and you just want them to get introduced to it, cause it's
a lot easier to break an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
Cause they're hollow. And
right.
I'm talking generalization, but I've seen a lot more broken acoustic guitars from like kids, like, so just think about that too. Like it's kind of the audience. if it's, you're getting it for a really little kid and that they're not good at taking care of their stuff. An acoustic may be kind of a rougher, you're going to have a rougher go at it.
Right. Yeah.
But, it is like we were saying earlier, it's kind of just whatever you want to do. Like if the kid is dead set on, he wants to play classical guitar. Never met a kid that was dead set on that yet in my life.
Yeah.
But if they want to, like, let them try, what I mean? But in general, it is really hard to kind of stretch your hands that far, even for me. And I do have littler hands than a lot of people, but definitely have bigger hands than a really little kid. Also, when you're buying acoustics, there are some specific things you want to really make sure that aren't broken. A really common one is the bridge will start to come up. So the bridge is the piece where the strings go into the body of the guitar. Usually it's like a little piece of wood, like a little strip of wood that your strings literally look like they're going into. That will come up a lot. Because the weight of the strings at full tuning, I think I've read, this is probably wrong, it's like 70 pounds of pressure.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah,
for sure.
When you got your strings all, you got your strings all up to tune. So it will kind of like raise the bridge off of the body, and that's bad because it eventually will come up all the way, and then you don't have a guitar anymore.
You're screwed.
Or at least not the one that works.
Right.
So really look for that. Make sure that the nut at the top isn't cracked or broken. That's more likely to happen on an acoustic guitar because the strings are thicker and they weigh more and they're just bigger. So they'll kind of mess up the nut sometimes. And then another thing with acoustic guitars that we kind of haven't really talked about, but basically another big difference between Squier guitar or Fender guitars and Gibson guitars is what we were talking about earlier. Fenders are easy to fix. That's really a big part of that's because the neck bolts onto the body. So there's like a plate and screws. And so you can take the neck off of a Stratocaster or a Fender guitar or bass But Gibson guitars are they're more like most acoustic guitars. They are glued in place, which obviously poses that's why you can't just replace the neck when your headstock breaks. Surprising fact though, Taylor acoustic guitars do have bolt-on necks. So you can take the neck off of a Taylor acoustic.
I never even bothered to look. I didn't realize that.
So keep that in mind. It's in the body. I mean, it doesn't have like a plate, like a Fender, but it's inside the body. There's like a little Taylor sticker. You just peel that off and you can take the neck off, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So, that's another benefit for Taylor. But even with really expensive acoustic guitars, where the neck meets the body, it will settle is the right word. And then after that, because it doesn't have the support of the body, it dips really low. There's like a bend in the neck right as it leaves the body.
Okay.
That's really not great. And I've seen, it's fixable to a certain degree. And I've seen some really expensive guitars do that. I wouldn't buy a guitar that's already doing that. Like I said, it can be fixed, but that's already like a major problem that you're going to have to deal with sooner than later.
And more likely that's going to be on like a used instrument if you do see that.
More than likely, yeah.
But you should always check. Always check.
And in general, you'll probably see people at guitar stores always like look down the plane of the neck. Really what they're looking for, you don't want the neck to bow up or down, but like you don't want it to look like a bow and arrow either direction.
Yeah.
For different reasons, but you really want it to pretty much look straight. You want it to be under a little bit, but not like if you can see like, wow, this looks like a bow and arrow, don't buy that guitar because that's and that usually happens more in like really cheap guitars.
Yeah.
Like right out of the box, brand new. Some of them are like, whoa.
Yeah.
An easy way to tell that you're going to have a problem, if the strings are really close to the fret, all the way down the neck, that's probably not a great sign. You're probably going to fret out like we were talking earlier. Or if your strings look like really far off the neck, that's almost a worse problem. Both are not good and totally can ruin your ability to play the instrument. But when the strings are really high, then it's probably a neck problem.
And double check like the saddles to make sure that the saddles aren't wrenched. So the saddles are, for those of you who don't know, where the part right in front of the bridge that we were talking about earlier on the guitar, where the string like sits on and heads down the neck, right, towards the headstock. So that's the saddle. It's appropriately named. If you see it, you'll be like, oh, duh. But check to see that they're not too low or high, because you can raise and lower those. So it could be that's, the guitar in the shop just had really high.
And that's for electrics.
Yeah, right. Acoustic is going to be a bit different for how the saddle works, for sure.
But it's all, you can pretty much fix anything on a guitar within reason. But like I was saying earlier, it's just how much you want to spend. Like neck problems, they're not a cheap fit. Other than just a little adjustment here or there, that's fine. But if you let it go, if it's gone too far and they have to reset the neck or refret the neck or replane the neck or anything like that, you're looking at like a really huge added expense.
Yeah, a couple $100 easily.
Probably more than that. So, think about that as part of it. But also, like if we didn't do a great job kind of explaining what you want the neck thing to look like when you're inspecting a neck, I'm sure there's a video on YouTube showing you kind of what exactly it should look like. But definitely make sure that you do that before you leave the store, I think. Yeah,
definitely. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so you've got your first guitar. Let's just say that all of those tips helped you make a decision. And so now you're home and you have this guitar. It's super overwhelming at first to like even know what to do. Like, where do you start? Everybody's like, oh, you can learn anything on YouTube now. The YouTube guitar world is really saturated.
Yeah.
So it's easy to kind of do like the Netflix thing. Like, I've looked for a video for an hour and I still haven't learned anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
YouTube roulette.
Yeah, I would say the first thing to do would be to learn how to tune your guitar or
Definitely.
bass.
Yeah. For sure.
And a lot of people skip that step, but the thing with guitars and basses is you pretty much have to tune it every time you pick it up.
Yep.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's pretty much going to go out all the time. It's probably going to go out as you play it. It's just kind of the way that it goes, you know, which is a total pain in the ass. I'm not going to lie. But it's something that you have to learn how to do. Like it's super important. While you're at the store, get yourself a tuner. Or they have apps, but I mean, it's an app on your phone. So it's not going to be as good as the tuner you're going to get at the guitar store. But yeah, I would definitely recommend picking one of those up before you head out of the store, a tuner.
For sure.
And, you know, so guitar and bass are pretty similar. So standard tuning on a guitar is E-A-D-G-B-E. And that's going from low to high. The easy way to remember that is Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye, Eddie. So that's going to be your standard tuning. And then for a bass, it's pretty much the same. You just take off it doesn't have the little strings.
It's
so
Eddie ate dynamite, good.
Eddie
It's a little darker.
Eddie ate dynamite, good.
Good.
Is it darker? Because in my version, Eddie died.
Yeah, but it said goodbye, Eddie. Like, oh, goodbye, Eddie. Sorry you ate dynamite. Whereas it's like, good he ate dynamite. I'm glad he ate that fucking dynamite. Fucking Eddie.
That's true. But yeah, so that's standard tuning. So in general, for almost everything that you're going to see, it's going to be that tuning. Not so much for metal. And I mean, certain folk and stuff will tune just the low E string down to a D. But in metal, a lot of times every string is tuned down a good bit.
Yeah.
And it depends on the song and the tuning. I know that seems contradictory to say, but you know, it's really important before you learn a song, make sure that the tuning is what you're tuned in, because that can be really frustrating. And also know like certain artists that you're trying to learn, like Stevie Ray Vaughan or Guns N' Roses, they're always going to be tuned down a half step. So
instead of E, it's E flat standard.
Yeah, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B flat, E flat.
Oh, and another thing actually that's really important, if you're not really a music theory person and these letters don't really mean all that much to you, you definitely want to be a little more familiar with them, because a lot of tuners, as you were mentioning, like chromatic tuners and stuff, tune only in sharps and naturals. So they don't have flats. So for example, you should know that a D sharp is also an E flat, because otherwise you're going to be looking at your tuner like, what the fuck is happening right now?
Yeah, we'll make a video about it. Well, that will be in the future, kind of explaining the basics of that. But basically just know, I just wanted you to know, like, it can be super frustrating if you're like, why does Patience by Guns N' Roses not sound right? I'm literally doing exactly what they're doing. Yeah, that's what it is. So it's not even a big deal. Don't worry about it. Don't fret it. Just don't learn that as your first song, maybe. Yeah. So that's kind of the tuning thing. Also, like with posture and stuff for guitar, I mean, it's certain ways that you want to play guitar. Like if you're going like a straight classical route, your posture is going to be really important. I would just say in general, though, if you're just wanting to learn like regular pop guitar, the only thing I would avoid is to play it laying down or to play it flat in your lap with your arm all twisted, just because that's going to create like a bad habit and eventually it will hurt your wrist. Yeah. But I don't think you have to, I mean, whatever is comfortable.
Don't slouch though. If you don't want to lean over your, because I know I have a tendency to do this, and a lot of kids that I teach, like, will be looking down at their strings, like trying to see what they're doing, and like their body is like a C shape. Like, don't do that, because it is actually also changing the way that your arm ligaments and muscles are like positioned. And so that not only is bad for your back and your neck, but it is actually bad for the tendons and stuff running down your arms, because that goes all the way up here. You know, it's like, it's all connected.
I will say too, one of the most important things that I pretty much tell all of my students before they leave on the first lesson is your hand when you play guitar. Let's talk about hand posture. The thing that you want to avoid the most is collapsing your palm against the neck. So everybody does it, it's fine. But basically you want your thumb to be facing towards the air, right? Towards the sky. And and then you want to wrap your hand around that and make a C. There should be a space between the guitar neck and the palm of your hands. If there's not a space, it's not going to work. Like there's very little that you can do, especially when you go to speed stuff up or to change chords or anything if that space is not there. So I would say get that right first, and it's going to feel weird.
Yeah.
For most people, I think it's very unnatural feeling, and a lot of people will complain like, oh, I feel it in my arm, but that's mostly just because they're trying to manipulate in a weird way. Like they're pushing their wrist forward to do that, whereas you really don't have to do that. It's all going to be in your fingers eventually, and your thumb. Your thumb is really important. Use your thumb to your benefit when you're learning your first chords. Think about basically what you're doing, and I think this would go for guitar or bass, is you're kind of using your thumb to pinch the strings between your fingers and the neck.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you don't want to over squeeze because most of the work, as you mentioned, should be done with your index, middle, ring, and pinky fingers. And the thumb, to me, and what I've seen online, you know, other like YouTube based people and stuff like that, a lot of them kind of say this, like use the thumb more as a guide and a light pressure rather than like the anchor point for everything.
Oh yeah.
You know?
When I said that, I don't mean like squeeze as hard as you can or anything like that. Just kind of use your thumb as much as you can. But also just kind of, your thumb is really the stabilizer for everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
Basically kind of think about it that way. So just keep it. You don't want it to ever be, if it's uncomfortable, you're probably doing something wrong. And that's where like a lesson or two may kind of help, just to have somebody physically like touch you and be able to kind of show you what you're doing wrong. Because it shouldn't hurt in your wrist or arm or anything like that. The pain at first is going to be in your fingertips. And I think that's guitar or bass. Because I remember when I first played bass, like I played it for like a day and I had this like huge water blister on my fingers.
Really? On your plucking fingers?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was bad because I'd already been playing guitar. So that part didn't do it. But yeah, with guitar or bass, if you're playing a lot at first, you're probably going to get blisters. They're just like, you know, regular blisters on your fingers, water. And it's going to hurt. But like, honestly, like it will go away if you don't give up.
Yeah.
Like the key is just to not give up. I always do the analogy. It's just like working out. Like you've done this for the first time in your life. Like imagine you worked out for the first time in your entire life. You are going to be sore the next day.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. But like if you just never go again, the next time you go to work out, you're going to be just as sore again.
Yep, definitely.
So like think about it the same way. Like do a little bit every day. Like, you know, if it hurts the first day, like don't practice for an hour. Like maybe do 15 minutes here or there just until you build up some stamina. But that is one thing that deters a lot of people from like playing guitar.
Yeah.
It's because it hurts. But it's just part of it. And I promise it will go away faster than you think it will.
Yeah.
But, you know, expect that. And then I guess for guitar versus bass, I would say the first 3 chords that I would learn on guitar, because you can play so many songs like this, and they're not really hard chords, would be A, D, and either E minor or E major. Neither of them's really hard. E minor is an easier chord to play, but it's not going to sound right for most of the songs I'm about to list. So if you learn A, D, and your E chord, E major, that is, you already know how to play so many songs with just those 3 chords. You've learned most blues songs are just those chords in a shuffle, which we can talk about in a different video exactly what a shuffle is. But you can play Wild Thing by the Trogs, you know, the Wild Thing, down, down. You can play Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin, just strum along.
Simplified version.
Yeah. Strum along. It'll be fun. Stir It Up
By Bob Marley. It's actually, consequently, the first song I ever learned how to play on a guitar.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. You can play Louie, Louie. Louie, Louie. Oh, no. I don't know the words, but you guys know that one. Back in Black, which is a really good, you know, everybody knows that one.
Yeah.
A little bit of a different order for Back in Black. It would be E first, then D, then A. But there you go. You've learned 3 chords and you just can play a bunch of songs, or at least the main part to a bunch of songs. Most of those probably changed some way. And then what would you say for bass is like the most important, like day one, try to get this fundamental at least down?
Yeah, day one, I would say, I think you kind of mentioned it earlier when we were talking, getting like just solidly like clean notes, like, you know, being able to hold down the third fret on your E string. And in fact, if you're just picking up bass, and you want to get into starting to fret a little bit, you know, in other words, holding down the string instead of just playing an open string, learn the song Everyday People by Sly and the Family Stone. It is one note the entire time. It is the third fret on the E string, the G note, and it's just pulsing, bum, 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 the entire time. So what you're going to learn is not only how to use that index middle walking thing, and now that is the primary way to play. You can play with your thumb, you can play with a pick. You should learn how to play the bass every way you can, because there's just so many cool ways to do it. But anyway, learn how to get a nice clean note where your tip of your fretting finger, generally the index is probably the first one you're going to use, is like right at the edge of the fret. So what I mean by the edge of the fret is you don't want to be on top of it. You don't want to be like, let's say you're holding the first fret. You don't want to have your index finger really close to the nut. You want to have it close to that first fret. And that's how you're going to avoid the buzz, constant even pressure, and timing, practicing, you know, trying to play the note on time. Now, timing is important for every musician, but bass especially, because it is a rhythm section instrument. Half of the job is to keep the band, you know, locked in tight, you know, with the drummer. So not to mention, and honestly, this applies for every instrument. But especially for bass, like if you chose bass, you chose a social instrument. You chose a support instrument. So you can get good playing by yourself and you can do that thing. But if you want to really be good and you want to actually like, you know, commit to the role of a bass player, then you got to play with other people. And the same, I think, can be said for guitar. Like just getting better in general isn't just about like learning chords and scales and your practice routine. But for me, it's speaking to people through music, right? It's the same way you get better at talking as a baby. Your parents talk to you and they correct your mistakes politely, or they laugh at your mistakes. They allow you to make those mistakes. But you know, you're doing it with people that are better than you at it. So you become better at it through observation and practice, in a more fun setting, you know, that's not just like, all right, time to put on the metronome and do, you know, C major for
Right.
10 rounds. So, but for guitar too, for sure. Definitely, you know, get in a room with other people, man, and play and trade ideas, because you never know what you might learn from, you know, from somebody who's either more experienced than you or even just a friend who plays as much as you do, you know? I mean, there's always room for growth.
Yeah.
So-
And don't be afraid to mess up. Like everybody messes up. Literally the best professional musician that you can possibly think of, they still mess up.
Yep.
So like, it's okay. Like, and you know, challenge yourself as you kind of go on, maybe in the first week, you know, just keep working on those 3 chords. And then the next week, add 1 and learn a new song. Like, you know, you don't have to learn every chord on guitar, like in your first couple months. Like
Right.
it's going to be okay. You know what I mean? Like just work on the fundamentals, work on transitions between chords and notes, slow it down, you know, don't try to do it full speed at first. But you know, just don't get discouraged. Don't give up. Like you can do this.
Yeah.
I really think even if it takes you longer than somebody else, like just keep going.
Yeah. Ultimately do it for you. Do it for the enjoyment. And another side note, that's a cool thing about bass and guitar is that, you know, in standard tuning, especially, these instruments are geometric, meaning that like there are shapes, right? Positions that your hand will do that you can move anywhere on the neck. And yeah, it'll be a different chord, a C instead of a D or something, but it's still going to be that type of chord. Whereas like piano, like every single shape is different. So
Yeah.
like, you know, you have to memorize a lot more of that. Yeah, you know, pattern recognition. I think if you're good at that kind of thing, then I think learning chords and stuff is going to be a lot, probably easier for you.
I think you'll find too, and this is probably just with most things in life, but as you go, it's just generally going to get easier. Like your first few months, your first year is going to be the worst that it's going to be. It's like going to get better. Even learning new chords, it's not going to take you as long once you're a year in to learn a new chord as it did in your first week.
Yep.
So, the important part is just, if you're enjoying it, just keep trying, and even if you're not enjoying it, like give it another try. You know what I mean? Like, just don't give up, I guess, is the important part. It's gonna work out for you if you just keep going and just keep trying.
Yeah. Yeah. Fine motor skill is like the biggest thing, I think, with guitar, right? Is developing this fine motor skill with your fingers. And, as humans, we're used to using our fingers and our thumbs, our opposable thumbs a lot, but not in this really specific way. So actually some things you can do to kind of work on your fine motor skills outside of playing. Let's say you played all day and your fingers hurt, like the tips of your fingers are raw from the steel strings. If you're into whatever age you are, if you're into Legos or Rubik's Cubes or pencil spinning, anything that requires really fine motor control and intricate movements is going to help. Don't get those little finger strengthener things, though. In my opinion, and from what I've been told, they don't actually help as far as like if anything, they can cause more damage because you're not actually trying to build strength in your fingers as much as you are trying to build control and dexterity. So doing things that are not about like how hard can I squeeze, but more so like how minuscule of a movement can I make with my finger and still have control over this thing or that thing. If you're a gamer, that probably helps. Things like other activities you can do to help with that motor control, I think is can definitely take you a long way. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sex, Drugs, and Disappointment. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave us a review and connect with us more on Instagram and TikTok at SDD Podcast. Each episode is also available in video format on YouTube. And don't forget,
have fun, don't do too much, and it's going to happen.